Hello everyone. Welcome to the new session of Refresher course in Mathematics organized by Ramanujan College, University of Delhi. In this lecture, we shall be discussing about plagiarism. The purpose of this lecture is to sensitize you about this serious ethical offense which exists in academia. So, let us quickly have an overview what we are going to discuss in this lecture. So, first we will be looking at the definition of plagiarism and various examples of plagiarism. Then we'll see the regulations which are drafted by UGC to curb plagiarism. And then we'll look at some interesting examples of the real life examples of plagiarism and the retraction of the article due to plagiarism. Then we'll look at some softwares which university uses and which you can also use to detect the plagiarism. And at the end, we'll look at some ways to avoid plagiarism. Okay, so let us see what is plagiarism. The word plagiarism is derived from the Latin word plagiarius, which literally means kidnapper. It dates back to the 1st century when a Roman poet, Martial, complained that another poet had kidnapped his verses. So, this word plagiarism means to commit literary theft. When someone copy the context of other authors' work and present it as one's own original work, then that is known as plagiarism. When we say content, the content not just include the results or the theorems or the tables, but they also include the diagrams, the figures, and most important, the ideas or the techniques that somebody has borrowed from some other author, and the due credit is not given to that author. And another form of plagiarism is self plagiarism, which not many are aware of. So, we'll be discussing it in detail. So, let us look at some examples of the ways one can do plagiarism or the plagiarism exists in academics. So, an extreme example of plagiarism is borrowing the study from another person and resubmit that study as his or her own study, word to word copying. So that is an extreme case of plagiarism, but it do happen in academia. Another example is, suppose you're writing an introduction of your thesis or maybe of your article, and in that introduction you copy sentences from several other papers that you have read. Okay, so that is plagiarism. Or okay, so what let us not copy the sentences. What you can do is you can paraphrase those sentences, that is you can write those sentences in your own words. Okay, but still the line of thought remains of the same author, and you're not if you're not giving a proper acknowledgement, this means that is plagiarism. Another example, if you're citing some existent sources or including inaccurate information about sources, or maybe you neglect to cite some sources, that is also plagiarism. Okay, so for example, you studied some theorem from some paper, and that paper refers to another article, but you relied on this article and you did not look at the original article and cite it as it is. But there was a problem there. That source did not exist at all. So the plagiarism, this is a plagiarism, and this will count it as a plagiarism done by you. Okay. Now, another interesting case, you include proper citations of sources, but there is no original work. All the work is picked up from here and there, from some papers, some or the other papers. Okay. Also, suppose when a student starts writing a thesis, or a naive person a naive person, or maybe a person who is starting writing articles, he or she uses some expressive language from some other paper without quotes and citations. That is also plagiarism. Okay? And it happens because it happens at many places where English is a second language and you want to make your paper to be pretty expressive. Another example is when you use the summary tables or the graphs or the diagrams and the figures of some other authors, you have picked up from some other sources, but you have not given those papers a proper citation. So you're presenting that work to be of your own. Okay? Another example, suppose you are taking some material which is available on the web and you're just copy pasting that material in your own article, in your own work, and you're not giving a proper citation to that. There are various other examples of plagiarism, but let us come to the plagiarism which is known as self plagiarism or text recycling, which not many are familiar with. Recently, in April 2020, UGC came up with a notification to bring awareness about the self plagiarism. So, what is self plagiarism? In the definition of plagiarism, we said that if you pick up the content of some other author and do not give the due credit to that author. But does that mean that we can plagiarize, we can use our own material freely? So, according to UGC, according to that notification, reproduction in part or whole of one's own previously published work without proper citation and proper acknowledgement is counted as self plagiarism. Also, if you present some old work as your new work, original work, for an academic advantage, that is clearly a self plagiarism. Okay? So, let us look at some other examples given by UGC. Now, first of all, as an author of an article, we sometimes assume that we can reuse our work either in full or portions of previously written text while writing a new work. Why not? What's the problem? That's our own work. No. Of course, one can use it to some extent, but under some regulations. So, UGC in its notification provides some instances of self plagiarism. So, if you're republishing your own paper, which already exists somewhere else, that is self plagiarism. Or suppose you're publishing some smaller work or excerpted work from a longer previous work just to increase the number of publications. Okay? Or maybe you are reusing your data. In some paper, you used some data or some graphs, and then you are reusing your data in your new paper without acknowledging it, without giving proper citation. Okay? So that is also self plagiarism. Or sometimes what happens is, although an author does a very long study, but he breaks up the study in parts. Okay? So maybe you make a paper of 2 or 3 pages or 4 pages, and that study is incomplete. So you break up a longer or larger study into smaller sections and you publish them as altogether new work. That is also counted as self plagiarism. And the last one is interesting. Paraphrasing one's own published work means, suppose you have written an introduction in your own paper and you're writing a new paper which is a continuation of that work, and you use the introduction as it is, word to word. That is also self plagiarism. So this is text recycling. So even if you're paraphrasing your own words, your own introduction, your own paper, then you have to give citation that this work has been done in the previous paper. Okay? So again, UGC also mentioned that in that notification, it is mentioned that self citations do not add any numbers to the individual citation index or H index in the global academia. So there is no use of increasing the number of papers just to increase the citations. Self citations doesn't work at all. Also, UGC has directed all the universities to strictly monitor and check the applicant's published work. So whenever you apply for promotions or selections, or maybe award of research degree, credit allotment, so wherever you're using your research work, then universities are directed to check that work for self plagiarism also. So one should avoid self plagiarism too. Okay. Plagiarism is considered a violation of academic integrity. In order to maintain academic integrity and to curb plagiarism, UGC in 2018 announced regulations and rules for promotion of academic integrity and prevention of plagiarism in higher educational institutes. Plagiarism is quantified into different levels in ascending order of severity for the purpose of its definition. So, the first level is the zero level, where the similarities are up to 10%. And this is not considered as plagiarism, minor similarities are there, so there is no penalty for level 0. The next level is the level 1, where the similarities are found between 10% to 40%. Then we have level 2, where the similarities are between 40% to 60%, and level 3, where the similarities are above 60%. Okay. So there are different types of penalties imposed by the UGC in that regulations, 2018 regulations, and they come under Institutional Academic Integrity Panel, IAIP, and penalties depend on the severity of the plagiarism, and the penalties are different from students and for the faculty members. So let us look at the penalties in the case of plagiarism in submission of thesis and dissertation. So as I told you, level 0 there is no penalty. If the plagiarism of level 1, then the student shall be asked to submit a revised script, maybe a thesis or dissertation, within a stipulated time period which shall not exceed 6 months. If the plagiarism of level 2, then the student shall be debarred from submitting a revised script for a period of 1 year, and he can resubmit it again after 1 year. If it is of level 3, then the student's registration for that program will be cancelled. Okay. And suppose the student has submitted the thesis again, and again the plagiarism is repeated. If plagiarism is found again, then such a student shall be punished for plagiarism of one level higher than the previous level committed by him or her. So this was the case until the student has not submitted the dissertation. But what happens if the student has submitted the dissertation and later, on a later date, say maybe after 2 or 3 years, somebody complains about the dissertation, somebody complained it as a plagiarism. So if a plagiarism is proved on a later date, then the date of award of degree, then his degree shall be put in abeyance for a period recommended by the IAP and approved by the head of institution. So you can see that plagiarism is a very serious offense and the penalties are really heavy. So let us look at the penalties for faculty members in academics and research publications. So when we are applying for promotions, when we are applying for a job, then we show a research work. So that has to go under plagiarism check. So level 0, again, no penalty. Level 1, the faculty member should be asked to withdraw that manuscript. So he will not get the credit of that manuscript in whatever procedure he is applying for. Level 2, that is 40 to 60%, the faculty member number 1 shall be asked to withdraw the manuscript. Number 2, he will not be given one annual increment. Number 3, he will not be allowed to supervisor any new master's or MPhil or PhD student for a period of 2 years. Okay? But if the plagiarism is of level 3, then the faculty member will be asked to withdraw the manuscript, that particular manuscript, and then he will be denied a right of 2 successive annual increments, and he will not be allowed to supervise any new master student or MPhil student, PhD student for a period of 3 years. So again, if the plagiarism is repeated, then the faculty member will be punished for the plagiarism of one level higher than the lower level committed by him. And in case the level 3 offense is repeated, then disciplinary action including suspension or the termination as per the service rules shall be taken by HEI. Now again, suppose your work went unnoticed for years, but later on, say after 5 years or 6 years, somebody makes a complaint about plagiarism of your work. Even then there is a provision of penalty. So what is the penalty? If the credit is already been obtained, so if the plagiarism is proved on a date later than the date of benefit or the credit, then that benefit or the credit shall be put in abeyance for a period recommended by IAP and approved by the head of institution. Okay? So again, you can see from the penalties that the punishment is really hard. It's very tough. However, there is some similarity of content excluded from the purview of plagiarism. So, what are these exclusions? If you have reproduced the work within the quotations, within the quotes, with the necessary permissions and attributions and proper citations to some extent, then that is excluded from the similarity checks. All references, bibliography, table of content, preface, or acknowledgements, they're all excluded from similarity checks. And if you're using some generic terms, some laws or the standard symbols, standard equations like heat equation, wave equation, Euler's equation, all those standard equations, you don't need to cite them. If you're using standard symbols like H stands for Hilbert space or V or W stand for vector spaces, right? Those are standard symbols. So you can use those symbols. Any common knowledge. So for example, sun rises from the east, or in mathematics, we say every vector space has a basis. So that is a common knowledge. Common knowledge in the sense that a lot of people know about that result. That's a very general kind of knowledge. Or maybe axiom of choice or Zorn's lemma. So these are common knowledge. You don't need to cite those common knowledge. And if there are some coincidental terms, so the terms can be coincidental in your paper, but exclusion is up to 14 consecutive words. That coincidence can be up to 14 consecutive words. Okay, so all these are excluded from similarity checks. Okay, so despite of the regulations and penalties imposed for plagiarism, not just in India but around the globe, the academics has witnessed several cases of plagiarism. We often come to know about some extreme cases of plagiarism by the VCs or the faculty members of various universities in the newspaper in India. There is an interesting website named retractionwatch.com. It tracks the information of retraction of articles from the journals due to plagiarism or maybe some other reasons also. Okay? So, at any point of time, if the journal comes to know about the plagiarism of an article, it can issue a retraction notice and can withdraw the articles. So let us see few instances of the same. So as you can see, there's this famous journal, Communication in Algebra. It sent a retraction notice to a paper citing that there is no new math in that paper. Okay, so that was a case of plagiarism. Another example, in Okinawa University, a researcher was suspended for 6 months when it was found that he has done plagiarism and used fake data to produce the work. So another example of a paper, algebra paper, it was retracted. It was by a physicist, and it was in a reputed journal of Elsevier, and it was retracted because there was a question on integrity. There was a question of there was a support for plagiarism. There was a reason to see plagiarism in that paper, so it was retracted from the journal. And as I said, if at a later stage also, if the plagiarism is found, then there can be penalties in that case also. So there is one such case where in a journal of applied of mathematics in physics, the paper lied for around 13 years, and that later on the journal got some complaint about the plagiarism, and the journal has to retract the paper, that 13-year-old paper, due to plagiarism. Okay? And not just papers, not just the research papers. In fact, books are also a part of plagiarism. So interestingly, there is this book titled History of Mathematics from a Mathematician's Vantage Point, which was written by a Greek mathematician, and it was published in 2004 by American Mathematical Society, right? The very renowned mathematical society. And later on, it was found that that book has copy pasted many materials from many resources. So the AMS has to withdraw that book from its publication. Okay. Another example. So a student was awarded a doctoral degree in University of Essen, and later on, 2 years later, it was found that the student has plagiarized the work in his doctoral thesis. So the doctoral degree of that student was withdrawn. Okay, so it's not that you can do plagiarism and you can escape from it. It can haunt you till the end of your career. So, one should be very careful while writing a paper to avoid plagiarism, as it does not bring legal penalties, but also it brings bad name and it damages the reputation. So, how to detect plagiarism? There are many anti plagiarism software tools available in the market. So, what is an anti plagiarism software tool? It searches the web and the database to detect the duplicate textual content. So, nowadays, the artificial intelligence is also used by many of the softwares to detect the similarity. There are a variety of softwares or tools. Some are paid, some are open source. So let us look at some paid softwares for which can be taken, which can be used by subscription. Okay, so one of the most famous softwares is Turnitin. Earlier, our university was also using the Delhi University was also using Turnitin to detect plagiarism, but now they have moved to Urkun. So, Turnitin is used by more than 30 million students at 15,000 institutions in 150 countries. Okay. It detects the sources from the subscription based journals and publications and the vast amount of web content and previously submitted papers. Okay. Next is Authenticate. iThenticate is for corporates, and it is marketed by Turnitin only. So this is for the newspapers and for the journals. So individually, people don't use iThenticate. It is only for the corporates. Again, it has a coverage of a database of over 70 billion web journal articles, and 70 billion web pages, 165 million journal articles. Okay. It compares contents against 95% of the top 10,000 cited journals. It also screens manuscript for 1,500 top publishers worldwide. So you know that whenever next you're submitting your research article to a journal, then that article will go through iThenticate. So the chances is that that article will be processed via iThenticate to check the similarity content. Next is Urkun. So few words about Urkun. So nowadays Delhi University and many other universities are using Urkun. The reason being, the UGC has given it for free to the universities. So universities who have signed MOU with InflipNet Center, they get this software free of cost from InflipNet Center. Okay. Again, it has a very vast data from which the similarity content is detected. It has a coverage of 130 million articles from global publishers, 300 million Urkun's archives, and more than 43 web pages. And the maximum source content search to check for plagiarism within a short time. So Urkund system check all the documents against three central source areas: the internet, published material such as journal books, etc., and previously submitted student material, for example, case studies, examination works, or in case of PhD, it can be theses or dissertations. Okay. So as an individual also, we can use Urkund. So what you can do is, for your personal purposes, you have to get an account made on Urkund. So how you can do that? You can get your user ID or analysis address from the university coordinators. So each university has university coordinators which look after the Urkund software. So once you once you request the university coordinates via email only, they will provide you some user ID and analysis address. So you can log in. If you wish, you can log into your user. You can using that user ID, you can log into Urkund's account, or the other way is you can submit a document via email to Urkund. So once you submit your document, maybe your research article or thesis or any other document, you will get a confirmation email within 5 minutes. Confirmation that Urkund has received the document. And once the result is generated, it will be mailed back to your email address. So you don't need to go anywhere. This detection can be done online. But finally, the certification will be given by the university coordinators only. So for example, if you're looking for a certificate, for your PhD, or maybe for the promotion, you want to give a certificate for plagiarism detection certificate, then you have to contact the university coordinators. Okay. So for more details, you can look at shodhganga.inflipnet.ac.in, and to know more about Urkund, how to use it, you can look at the handbook, plagiarism handbook, which is there on this address. Now look at the ways. Oh, sorry. So yeah, this was about Urkund, and there are other paid anti-plagiarism tools, softwares like Blackboard, plagiarism detection, and Plagium, and many more. If you search on Google, you will find many more softwares to detect the anti-plagiarism. to detect the plagiarism, anti-plagiarism softwares. There are many open sources also which are available freely. You just need to upload your document, and then you'll get back the report. But there are many limitations. Sometimes security is a problem. There is a limitation of words, so you cannot submit an article more than say 1,000 words or more than 10,000 words. So that those are the limitations on these free open sources. Okay. But there are few which are very good. So for example, copy space, copy leaks, plag scan, bibme, plag tracker, plagiarism checker x. This is a very nice software. Not software, the tool. So Grammarly, Duplichecker. So they also access the web, the information available on the web, and then they have a large database on which they check for similarity. So one can use these open sources also. But if you're a member of university where which has signed an MU with Inflibnet, then I would I would urge you to use the paid softwares like Urkund or Turnitin, whichever software your university is using. So many times the head of the department also have access to these softwares. So you can request them to get your document checked. Okay, so we now come to the last point of the talk, which is the prevention. That is the most important part. So how to avoid plagiarism. So there is a very nice article written by Richard Nightingale on avoiding plagiarism in mathematics. So I have picked a few points from that paper. So one can understand that uh, plagiarism in mathematics is a little different from plagiarism in literature. Okay, because many times the results remain the same, and uh, so it's very difficult. It's not always easy to present the work in your own word, but you have to do it. If you want to avoid plagiarism, you have to do it systematically. So what are the ways you can avoid plagiarism in your work? So the first advice is you look away from a source while writing. This means you may be reading from various papers, various articles. So you can make notes of those points. But when you're writing your own material, when you're writing your own paper, just keep those sources away. Don't look at those sources. In that way, you can write your own words. You will be able to present your own ideas. Second important point is you have to cite everything you borrow. May it be quotations if you're borrowing a quote of somebody, or information, or ideas, or maybe you're paraphrasing something in your own words. So you're writing something in your own words. Even then, you have to cite it. So, for example, suppose you are using the idea, you're generalizing a theorem and you're using the idea given by somebody else, right? Then we must give due credit to to the person who gave the original idea. So you can write in your paper that the proof is based on the ideas, techniques used in, say, 2 theorem 2.3. There are some standard ways to use the citation. So this is one of those ways. So you can give credit to the author who brought the original idea. And similarly, maybe in the introduction, or maybe in the main papers, you're using a discussion which was given in some other paper also. Maybe you might be paraphrasing that discussion, but a similar discussion is given in some other topic. Then again, you should give acknowledgement that somebody else has discussed the things on the same lines. So you can write it as a similar discussion on this topic can be found in, say, 3. So give a proper citation of whatever you're borrowing, either quotations or paraphrasing or information. Next point is, whenever you're using some graphics or diagrams, try to create your own graphics. Do not use anyone else graphics without giving the proper credit. If you are reprinting the figure for publication, that requires permission from the copyright holder. Even if you're using some figures from the web, from the internet, from the websites, different websites, then there is a problem of copywriting. Okay? So you cannot use all the figures freely and produce those figures as your own. So if you want to use, you have to check what is the type of copyright. Or even if you're using that, after taking the permissions also, then you have to give a citation to those graphics or diagrams. Now, few things can be left from citations. For examples, definitions, or few theorems which are known, concise algorithms. So you may look directly at some source. So for example, if you're giving a definition of a vector space, then you may not cite the reference. If you're giving some theorem, as I told you, some famous theorem, Hilbert basis theorem, or some any other famous theorem, which is a common knowledge for the others, then you may not cite them. But if there are certain results which are not known to a larger public, then you have to cite those, right? Then you have to give due credit. And it's always good to do that. It's always good to make your audience, make your readers aware from where have you used, from where is that theorem coming from. Okay, so a reference is required unless the statement is well known and can be found in many sources, right? There are some other important points also which one must keep in mind while writing a paper. So while you are reading the, as I said, look away from the sources. So you might have referred to many books, many papers, but don't look at those sources while writing your paper. But in that case, you may skip few things. You may skip to give proper acknowledgement. So what you can do is, you can make a list of authors whose work or idea is used during the research. So when you're writing some idea, when you're writing some line, and it is actually an idea, okay, we are going to discuss it in this manner, and you have studied it somewhere else also. So in your notes, make notes, in your notes, write the proper citation. Okay. Also keep a record of your own ideas, summary of others' materials, and the exact wording you copied in a notebook. So, for example, you copied, say, 4 or 5 lines from a paper, which even you're paraphrasing, you cannot change it a lot. Then you can put that in quotes with a proper citation. But do it. So, as I said, look away from the sources that you have used. So, when you're looking away, then you have to write it somewhere. So, keep a record of your ideas. And next is a similar thing. So, if you're copy pasting some lines or passages, add the quotation marks with the citation. Uh, one important point is, you have to check all the cited articles properly. So, as I said in the beginning, suppose you have used suppose you're referring to a paper of, say, X. In that paper, you want one theorem, and X has also referred to, say, Y for that theorem. You did not bother to look at Y. You just simply gave the reference as Y because it was mentioned in X. But there was a problem in X. There's a problem in that reference Y. That reference may not exist at all. So it will be a case of plagiarism for you. So if you are citing any article, any book, then please have a look at that article, that whether that article exists in real, whether the numbers are given properly or not. So do not write anything blindly. because whatever you write in your article, that becomes your work. So that will be counted for plagiarism at your part. And to avoid self plagiarism, it is advisable to always cite your own published material. Even if you're paraphrasing the lines of introduction, although it's advisable not to paraphrase those lines of your own introduction, but if few things are similar, then uh, you can always acknowledge your own work. Don't use your work freely. And lastly, before submitting the paper to a journal, please use anti-plagiarism tool, right? You can advise your student also before, I mean, of course they have to go through this plagiarism check. So they can check the plagiarism level, the level 0, 1 or 2, using an anti-plagiarism tool on their own before submitting the work. Now there are some excellent references which tell you how to write a paper or a book properly, how to avoid plagiarism, how to write the introduction, and several other things. So one such reference is the book by Gibaldi. It's a MLA handbook for writers of research papers. It's a very nice book, excellent book. And then there is a community by Mathematical American Association. So on their website they have this tab for writing, and in this column of writing you can find, so on this website mathcom.org /writing, you will find many other resources for writing good papers. So there you will find plenty of references there. And so all of us are familiar with Professor Terence Tao. So he writes blogs, nice blogs. So he has one such blog on write in your own voice. So you must read that blog. It's written very nicely. So I'll end this session by a famous quote which Terence Tao has mentioned on his in his blog, and it was actually said by Oscar Wilde, a critic in Pall Mall. So he says that while one should always study the method of a great artist, one should never imitate his manner. The manner of an artist is essentially individual. The method of an artist is absolutely universal. The first is personality, which no one should copy. The second is perfection, which all should aim at. So, thanks. Hope this session was useful for you.